Case study that was done is when climate disasters happen, gender-based violence also increases. There was like this research done by UNFPA. It was like a very simple research where they checked during a climate disaster, so for example floods or like wildfires, the search history, the people searching for domestic helpline numbers spiked. When I was like starting into climate activism, I initially felt very, very lonely. I was like so frustrated. Why is nobody taking a change? Why is no one else as worried as me? But honestly, in many countries, when there is climate disasters, young women and girls are the first to be taken out of schools because there's poverty that exacerbates due to climate crisis, and many young women and girls have issues accessing education. And definitely there's also case studies that shows then how child marriage increases. So
even in these times, is it?
Yes.
That climate activism is very overwhelming. If there are teens or young adults who are interested to go this path, how can the adults in their family, parents, mentors support them in their overall well-being?
I had the privilege learning about climate change in school. Of you're taught that this is going to happen, but then the thing is, every time we're communicated about climate change, we're communicated in the future tense. This is going to happen. This is going to happen to the future generations. We're going to see this level of destructions, but nobody told me that it's going to happen now. Initially, when I started this work, I didn't even know I was a climate activist.
Yes, exactly.
I didn't even know there was a term for this or anything.
Yes.
Even in COP, there's a big issue of gender parity where most of the delegations are male. We don't have enough women in official delegations and women that are negotiators and in decision-making spaces. And, we're tired of just being beneficiaries and just like dealing with the outcomes of the things, but we need to be there when the outcomes are being set. We have seen in the past, like with different kinds of movements, whether it is the civil rights movement, the decolonial movement, the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, the feminist movements and waves, all of these movements has made a difference. So we as the climate movement, we're not starting from scratch.
Yes.
We are holding onto the movement that has come before us, and we're holding onto the strength from this movement to make a new wave of difference.
A single life-changing environmental disaster transformed a 15-year-old teenager into one of today's most powerful voices for climate justice. I'm so excited to share this inspiring story with you in this first episode of Season 3 of the Eco Sheroes Podcast. I'm your host, Pallavi Santhapuram. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce you to Ayshka Najib, a remarkable 23-year-old climate activist who began her journey right here in the UAE with roots in India. In our conversation, Ayeshka shares insights from her incredible work as a Unicef youth advocate and her leadership role with the UN Women's Feminist Action for Climate Justice Coalition. She is actively involved in regional and global climate events, including the MENA Climate Week, the Youth for Climate Summit, Fridays for Future, Mapa movement, COP27, COP28 and COP29. Wow, I know what you're thinking. That sounds like such an enormous responsibility for someone so young. Yes, she does it all. Her passion and dedication are truly inspiring. In this episode, she explains how climate change affects women more, practical ways to support youth-led environmental initiatives, and actionable steps you can take from your homes and communities that truly make a difference. What I find most amazing about Ayeshka's story isn't just her work at big international climate conferences, but also how a traumatic incident in her personal life did not break her, but sparked her activism at such a young age. She will share this touching story with us during our conversation. Whether you're concerned about your children's future or looking for ways to make a difference in your daily life, Ayeshka offers insights into many aspects of our lives. So with no further ado, let's dive in. Ayshka Najib, I'm so glad to have you on the show today. I think I remember meeting you during the dinner meet of Verified Champions
Yeah.
campaign at COP28.
Yes.
And I was so moved by your story, but at the same time, I was so inspired by how you did not get traumatized, but in fact took action, and you were determined to find solutions to the problem of climate change and climate action. So that was really inspiring. I would love to know if you could tell that story of yours and what really triggered your climate activism.
Yeah, for sure. I often also get asked what was your turning point in life, right? What was the moment that you knew that you wanted to dedicate your work to climate justice? I don't know if it is one moment. It was definitely multiple moments that sparked the work that I do. But the one that sits the closest to my heart is the floods that I witnessed. So it was 2018, and I was around 14 years old at the time. And I'm here based in Dubai, but I have my grandmother who is based in Kerala in India, south of India, where I'm originally from. So I often go there for my summer vacations to spend my time with my grandmother. So it was 2018, and I was doing the same. And honestly, when it started raining, the monsoon rains, I got very excited, right? Because we don't get rains often in
Absolutely.
Dubai. So I was playing in the rain, and I was so excited. But then the thing was, this rain started to become more and more intense as the days went by, and it was not stopping.
Yeah.
And slowly it started to turn into storms and heavy thunder and lightning. And we were watching the news, and we heard that there are certain areas that were getting flooded, and that we had to stay alert and stay safe. So obviously something that I was excited about slowly started turning into something that I was fearful about. And of course, the floods took over our area as well. And it was extremely terrifying watching the backyard that I just played at fully getting flooded. And I saw all of the houses around me were going underwater, trees were falling, and it was extremely, how do you say, that moment of horror,
Yes.
that this could be you too, your house could be next, you don't know which moment it's going to happen. And I remember, like, at night I used to be very, very, very scared of sleeping, and I used to hug my grandmother, and she would be like, no, it's okay, just go to sleep, we'll be safe. And I had this fear that if I close my eyes, the next moment I open it, I might be underwater. That fearness of, like, not knowing what's next, what's going to happen next was really bad. And I saw my community suffer this flood, and I saw everything just get washed away, and everything get, like, destroyed all around me. And I was just 14 years old, to witness all of that. And then the reality is that ever since that year, Kerala has been, dealing with floods every other year. It's becoming more and more frequent and more worse.
Intense, I think.
More and more intense, and especially since it's a coastal area. It's facing so many difficulties for all of the people that live closer to the river banks, especially the fisher communities and so on. And it's definitely a difficult sight to witness. So something, that I did as soon as I dealt with those floods was, like, go and do more research. Like, why is this happening? Why is my hometown being flooded, and why does my community have to face this? And I had the privilege about learning about climate change in school. Of you're taught that this is going to happen, but then the thing is, every time we're communicated about climate change, we're communicated in the future tense, that this is going to happen, this is going to happen to the future generations, we're going to see this level of destructions. But nobody told me that it's going to happen now, that I'm the next one to suffer. And so it was that reality that we're in the crisis now, and this is an emergency. And that feeling just engulfed me, and that's when I knew I had to do something, because I had to save my community, I had to save myself. I wanted to see a better world where my little sister can grow up in. So that was really the story that drove me to take action on climate.
That really moved me too, because I have seen the movie which was made, right? And
2018.
I was in tears. I was sobbing. I was sobbing when I was looking at the movie which was made. I just can't imagine what the people must have gone through and what you must have gone through, experiencing all of that, firsthand.
Yeah.
So, yes, but this is what triggered your climate activism. But can you talk about your journey into the becoming a climate activist? Because many of our listeners are mothers and have teenagers or, young adults who might also be inclined towards taking up this as a career path or a profession. So it would be great if you could talk about your journey into becoming a climate activist and what the support from the adults in your house, how did it make a difference? Like what support can any child expect from an adult from the house to pursue this path?
Yeah, definitely. I love that question, right? Because initially when I started this work, I didn't even know I was a climate activist.
Yes, exactly.
I didn't even know there was a term for this or anything.
Yes.
So I was in school at the time when when all of this happened. So
Yeah.
immediately that was my first environment that I felt like I could make a difference in. So we started up an eco club
Okay,
in my school.
in your school.
Yeah, and we were like, okay, we need to make our school as sustainable as possible. And back then, even now it's being continued, but Ministry of Education used to give schools an eco flag.
Okay.
So it would be like eco certified, and you would get a
Nice.
green flag, and you have to meet XYZ categories to do that. So that was like my first aim. How do I make sure that we're having recycling bins all over school? How are we going to make sure that climate change is going to be taught in schools? How do we have programs during Earth months that we come and bring share information and bring like students together to mobilize for it. And I also really liked writing, so I took up like journalism at that time, and how do I make sure
Nice.
that I am communicating about the climate crisis within my school newsletters or school
Nice.
magazines and things like
So
that.
you had this journalism as an ECA or a subject as such?
It wasn't necessarily a subject, but I had a really good relationship with my English teacher who
nice.
encouraged me a lot. She was the
Yeah.
first person I would go and be like, hey, this is an article I wrote, and she would like give me feedbacks on like, okay, this
nice.
is how you could make it better, or this is very important. And she definitely also encouraged me to share the articles I was writing with my classmates, and gave like opportunities for that as well. So I definitely also think that teachers have a really crucial role to play, because they shape the minds of students from such an early age. And that's why I also think climate change education is very, very important, that all curriculums need to incorporate it. I remember encouraging my house, my mom and my dad to like compost and to recycle and smaller things like that. And honestly, I feel like growing up in an Asian household, sustainability is a practice that is already, embedded in our culture. So it wasn't that difficult. But I definitely I'm thankful for my parents, because they always encouraged my curiosity to go and explore, the nature, go and explore like solutions to the challenges that we're facing and so on. And they also always gave me the space to come and share all of the things that I've been learning. Sometimes my mom would just be in the kitchen. I'd be like, hey, I have a story to tell you. Hey, I have something to tell you. And like, I felt like I was pestering her, but I would also take these opportunity to like, share.
Nice.
But now they're the most supportive parents I could ask for. Like, even when I go to different conferences, if there's a live webcast of my speech, they sit at home and they watch my speech and everything, and they're always sharing it with the family. So I'm really thankful, and I completely agree with you. Like, the adults in our life have a very important role to play in, number one, accepting what the future generations are going to face in terms of the climate crisis, but also accepting our current courage to do something about it, because it's difficult. The easiest route is to be like, oh, we are gonna die and that's it, let's just accept our fate.
Exactly.
But those who have the bravery and the courage to be like, no, this is not going to be our fate, we're going to change it, I think that needs to be embraced collectively.
Absolutely. That's so well said. And yes, because as teens and, young adults trying to navigate this journey of choosing a career, I think support and encouragement in what they want to pursue is so important, as you said, because your parents had gave you all that support. I think it was easy for you to navigate through, taking up this as an career path. But then what career path did you choose to pursue climate activism? So if you could throw some light on that.
Honestly, for me, it was not necessarily a career path, you know. I didn't really think about it as, okay, this is a career that I want to pursue.
Okay.
It was more emotional for me. I was dealing with a lot of eco-anxiety at the time, the fear of what's going to happen to my communities and my future. But also I was really, really taken by the guilt of not doing enough,
anything.
or like living in a city that's like so fast paced and so it's also like emitting a lot of carbon, and my lifestyle choices and all of that, and also seeing like the countries around me and they're not taking any action really made me angry and made me feel guilty as well. So it was like these emotions that made me commit to doing the work on climate change. So I wouldn't really say I initially thought of it as a career. I just got stuck to it.
Okay.
And I definitely explored it to be like, okay, how do I commit my skills, right? So what skills am I bringing to the table? So I was like studying politics and like policy science and also environmental studies a lot, and I was thinking about how I can use those skills and my knowledge to commit to the climate crisis, because often at times what people feel is that you have to be a scientist, only then you can do work around climate change. But I really want to unpack that, because I really see it as like you need all skills. It's an all hands on deck kind of situation. So you need like innovators, storytellers, content creators, lawyers, policy makers, scientists, teachers, and all of those skills to come together. Because at the end of the day, climate crisis is going to affect all of us, it's going to affect all of the sectors. So we need a very intersectional approach in order to take action for it.
Absolutely. So what did you graduate in, or what is your study background?
Yeah, so I'm really focusing on environmental studies. Yeah, but definitely there's like people that can go into different fields and make sure that they are incorporating environmental practices into it. So I also definitely encourage people that you don't have to stick to like one subject or something to come to taking action on climate. You can always explore like what is your passion and where does your passion meet sustainability. So think about it in that lens, So for example, you could be like a media and communications graduate, but we need so many storytellers in this movement to be able to communicate about climate crisis in a more accessible manner. So you have a, space at the table. Same like lawyers. We need more people that can understand environmental law and, environmental impact assessments. So we need you at the table. So yeah, different hats always have a space at the table. So it's really to think about what are my skills, what are my passion, and what's something that is new that I can bring to this diaspora.
Right. Okay. And so what are the roles you are currently catering to at present? Because you have a long list, which I don't even remember. So yeah, if you could tell us what is the roles you are catering to right now.
Yeah, I can take you through a small trip down my journey.
Yes, that would be great.
Yeah, so I mean, definitely after school, I was hearing, it was like around 2019, I was hearing a lot about Fridays for Future and
Yes.
Greta Thunberg, who is now a good friend of mine.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You know, was like striking outside schools in Sweden, and Fridays for Future was slowly growing into a bigger global movement.
Yes.
So the thing was like, it was really like Eurocentric back then too. Like
Yes.
it was more in the north side. So I met a couple of people online, and we were like, how can we create a Fridays for Future that's more global south centric, you know, that's more catered to our realities and our stories. So we created, it was during COVID time, but we created something called Fridays for Future Mapa,
Yeah.
which stands for Most Affected People and Areas, because we felt like the global climate movement wasn't really telling the stories of the frontline communities who are the most impacted by climate crisis.
True.
So we used a lot of like media back then, like social media and different kinds of tactics to bring to light how climate change was impacting frontline communities, and especially like indigenous peoples, pastoralists, fisher communities, and all of that. And there was also a lot of climate disasters happening back then.
Yes.
And it was like telling that we are facing a dual crisis of COVID and both climate crises at the same time. So look how impacted we are, right? And after Fridays for Future Mapa, I slowly started getting into the UN spaces a lot, especially exploring my passion for the intersections of gender and climate, because in school I had learned about the first ever eco-feminist movement, which is the Chipko movement.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, which
the ladies hugging
exactly.
those trees.
For those who don't know, I think it was in Haryana, where women, there was like tree felling, and a lot of women depended on those forests for their livelihoods. So they went and hugged the trees
Yeah, they were
to
not
prevent
letting
exactly from the felling of it. And then they initially won that kind of movement, and they could protect their foresters. So I knew initially, like from earlier on, the impact and the leadership that women carry in these spaces. So I started researching more and exploring more about the intersections of gender and climate, and I started working with UN Women in the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Coalition, where we were exploring those intersections in a multilateral space and a decision-making space. And then later on, I got picked up by Unicef in the UAE.
Yes.
And I was nominated to be the youth advocate to the UAE, and I got that opportunity, and I started advising UNICEF strategically on their climate plans in the
Nice.
UAE, and something that I got to work on, which I hold really dearly and close to me, is bringing climate change education. So it was a partnership between UNICEF and the Ministry of Education in the UAE, where we go to design curriculum on climate change.
Wow.
And I helped a little bit around that as well. And I started going to schools and teaching children. I
How nice.
taught almost 100 children across UAE on climate change. And that was an incredible moment to me that I'll always cherish. And I'll be grateful to UNICEF for giving me that opportunity as well. And I've been navigating a lot of, climate change related processes, especially within the UN framework, and how they set normative laws and soft laws around climate change. And right now I'm focusing a lot on just transition. So how we can get, there is something called a Just Transition Work Program that has been adopted within the UNFCCC. So UNFCCC stands for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So I'm really supporting in that process to make sure that we have a Just Transition plan adopted within the UN framework that is going to serve communities and that's going to serve workers around the world equally. And another thing that I am working on, sorry, it's a couple of things.
Yeah, it's a long list. Come on, go on.
Is the Youth Climate Justice Fund. So I'm the MENA regional facilitator. So we are the first ever for youth by youth climate justice fund to exist.
Wow.
And we really focus on getting accessible funding to youth movements across the world, because there's the statistics that came out that said that only 0.7 than 5% of all global philanthropy goes to youth-led climate projects, which is less than 1%, right?
Exactly,
So
yeah.
it's very concerning because young people are leaders and they're making
Yes.
impacts within their communities and within like leading local projects and so on. So it's very important that we get the resources and funding to their hands so that they can
Absolutely.
continue to make those changes, because at the
Yes.
end of the day the work that we do needs to be sustainable, right? It needs to
Yes.
be supported, and we have to be empowered with these resources. So that's something that I'm focusing on right now.
Wow, that's a long list. You mentioned about Mapa, right? So the Fridays for Future Mapa. Can you elaborate a little more about it? How are you helping the affected communities who are, the communities that are affected by climate change? And how can we as common people support your efforts in this movement?
So the first thing was to like get their stories out, because the way that climate change was being talked about was first in future tense, that it is going to happen in like a distant future, and second is that it was more like Eurocentric approaches. So we had to make sure that all of these global south countries, their stories were being told,
Yeah.
and we were also changing the narrative that the climate crisis is a story of now.
Yes.
So we were really, collaborating with bigger media and big presses to, get these stories out. But at the same time, we were also mobilizing like local efforts. Like here in the UAE, we held the local conference of youth, which I also did in my capacity as a UNICEF youth advocate, and where we bring young people from across the UAE to create a community to talk about how is climate change impacting you, but also what are some of the changes that we want to see. And we ended up preparing a document, a set of recommendations, and we submitted that formally to the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment and also the Ministry of Education. We also met with some of the negotiators who are in the UAE official delegation, who
Okay.
go and negotiate on behalf of the country, in the climate conferences. So we met some of those delegates, especially the delegate on ACE, which is Action for Climate Empowerment.
Okay.
And that focuses a lot on youth empowerment and capacity building and building tools to mobilize young people and so on. So we met with these delegates and we were like, hey, these are the recommendations that we have and these are the changes that we want to see. And they were very receptive of our recommendations. So it was very nice to see that level of leadership as well, coming from these people. I think in terms of the community, in terms of like people that, general public,
Yeah.
the first thing that you need to do is like find your community to engage in.
Okay.
So I feel like in UAE we still have a long way to go to create those communities, because the actions that we are doing are often in silos. So how do we come together, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like we need to create those platforms for people to come together.
Okay.
So that's definitely one thing to do. The second thing is obviously like, if you have access to like schools and so on, definitely do a better job in mobilizing for climate change education, because that's where it begins. Because,
Right.
young people need to get that support to learn about climate change.
Yes.
Only then can they take action later on. Another thing is, definitely we need to combat mis and disinformation.
Yes, so important.
So we have to be very careful about like the research or like, what you're sharing about climate change and what's the news that's being put out there, because there's a lot of fake and false information that's also being put out there, especially on climate science. So what part can you play
Yes.
in making sure that you're communicating the correct information, you're making sure that it's also reaching a wider audience.
That's true.
Yeah.
Very well said. You talked about education and you have helped, along with the UNICEF, you have also helped them formulate this curriculum, which is now, is it integrated into the different years of school curriculum, or is it yet to be integrated?
So we launched like a pilot project, and we're
Okay.
targeting 50% of schools in the UAE at the moment.
Okay.
So it's already being rolled out.
Nice.
And one of the main things that we are doing is training the trainers.
So important, yeah.
Exactly, because we could have a curriculum, but who's going to deliver the curriculum, right?
Exactly.
So we're putting a lot of energy and focus on that as well. So we're training thousands of teachers and principals across the UAE
Yeah.
on climate change first, and then like focusing on how they deliver the curriculum. Yeah.
So you talked about funding, and you said that youth-led climate initiatives are not getting enough funding. So the amongst the listeners, if there are any established professionals who can help through their networks and resources, how can they support young activists like you and your work?
Yeah, this is a very, very important issue, right? Because
Yeah.
for us to sustain the work, we need funding.
Yes.
We need funding to, to support the core projects of our work. But then the issue is that many young people have like a lot of barriers. Because number one, not all of the youth organizations are officially registered.
Yeah.
Because that takes lots of documentation and lots of processes to, get officially registered.
True.
And then the second thing is that because they're not officially registered, they might not have access to bank accounts and so
Yeah.
on. So it becomes harder for them to receive funding. And there's like this quote that I always say, which is the greatest minds of our generations are too busy writing grant application. And that's the reality, because we're spending our weekends and hours writing grant application. So we need to make sure that there's more and more accessible funding coming
Yes.
towards young people to support our projects. So there are many established like funds. So I
Okay.
would say definitely to collaborate with those funds to get accessible funding to young people. But also if there are businesses that can support youth movement, then it was also another change that they can make.
Yes, absolutely. And that can also contribute towards their CSR or CSR activities, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because at the end of the day, it's important to identify who the real change makers are.
Yes.
And how do we support and empower them.
Yes, I totally agree with that. Yeah. So you have been involved in policy making in very high level forums like COP27, COP28, COP29. I'm very curious to know, what is the one fact which drives these policy changes or decisions which common people like me don't know?
Oh my God.
It's,
It's hard to
just a
pinpoint
curious-
one thing.
Yeah. No, you can just tell one fact or one thing which.
Yeah, so I mean, basically there are the negotiations that happened. COPS stands for Conference of Parties. And they happen every year. And they have a couple of agendas that they negotiate on. For example, mitigation, adaptation, climate finance, just transition, etc. So we have over like hundreds and thousands of people coming together in one country every year to negotiate on the climate futures.
Yeah.
So it definitely COP is one of like the biggest
Yes,
climate
climate
gatherings that
conference.
happens, and
Yes.
everybody needs to be aware of it. We need to make COP more accessible to like the local people, like what's happening at COP more accessible to local people.
Yeah.
Honestly, COPs are very, how do you say, chaotic. There's so much happening all at once, and you easily get like so burnt out, so overwhelmed. Something that I have, learned to do during the COPs is to identify my community that I'm going to work with and who
Okay.
I'm going to push an agenda with.
Okay.
So for that, I work with the constituencies. So under something that people don't know is that they think that COP is only with like the parties and like, the official country negotiators.
Yeah.
But what they don't know is that within the Rio Convention, so within the Conference of the Parties, there is something called the observer constituencies.
Okay.
So there are 9 official observers, which the UNFCCC, the Framework Convention, recognizes.
Okay.
So one of the observer constituencies is like women and gender. Then there is youth, there's indigenous peoples, there's farmers. So these official observer constituency also gets a seat at the table.
Nice.
And
yeah.
they are involved in many institutional processes of like submissions, making statements,
Okay.
and having bilaterals with country delegations and so on. So maybe you didn't know it, but like there
Yeah.
are official like observers also have an official role to play.
That's
within-
wonderful, because
Exactly.
they are the real people who are, experiencing these
Exactly.
effects of climate change. Yes.
Yeah, so we have that privilege to knock on the doors of diplomacy and give them a reality check
Yes.
that this is what is happening to our communities. So I work with the Women and Gender constituency because I have a lot of like passion for the intersections of
Yes.
gender and climate. So we, often take a seat at the table whenever we are allowed to, and make sure that all of these negotiation tracks, whether it's adaptation, mitigation, just transition, or climate finance, are always bringing the intersections of gender and climate and making sure that these policies will cater to women across the world, women and girls across the world who are suffering the brunt of the climate crisis.
Yeah, coming to that point, you have always emphasized this that gender equality is very important to fight climate change and for climate justice. And women, climate change affects women more than any other gender. Can you elaborate a bit on it for people to understand why does climate change really affect women more, and why is gender equality important to fight climate change?
Yeah, for sure. So first, what we need to understand is that climate change was not born in an equal world, right?
Yeah.
It was born in an unequal world. So what climate change does, it is exacerbates these inequalities. It escalates these inequalities. So to give like a solid example. Is when like floods and disasters happen, how do we take into
Yes.
consideration women who are pregnant or women who are like nursing, and make sure that adaptation, when we talk about adaptation to these climate disasters, we take into consideration these women who would be vulnerable to the
Yeah.
disasters, right? So how do we make it more accessible? Another example is in many countries, there is still women who don't have ownership of land. So in many countries, like for example, that is agricultural driven
Yeah,
economies,
yeah.
80% of the farmers are women. But then imagine this 80% of the farmers who are women don't have ownership of that land. So for example, if there's a crop failure, they cannot like access a lot of the support that the government offers because at the end of the day, they don't own those land.
Okay.
Another thing is that we've also known that agroecology and climate smart agriculture actually enhances the nutrition and the resilience of the land, and it can like prevent crop failure and so on.
Okay.
But then if women don't have ownership of those land, they cannot make decisions about what is being done on those lands. So
Yeah.
we have seen case studies where women get ownership of land, more agroecology and climate smart agricultural practices come into implementation, and we have seen how that can improve food security.
Yes.
And things like that. Another case study that was done is when climate disasters happen, gender-based violence also increases. So there was like this research done by UNFPA. It was like a very simple research where they checked during a climate disaster, so for example floods or like wildfires, the search history, the people searching for domestic helpline numbers spiked. So they were able to see that during these disasters, gender-based violence also spikes up.
Oh my God,
So
okay.
that's definitely another thing to address.
Yes.
And also coming back to like many countries are still like agricultural-driven economies, and when due to climate crisis, obviously there's going to be agricultural failures,
Yes.
right? Due to drought, water scarcity,
Yes.
and so on. And so when many of these women farmers come home, they face domestic violence as well because they're having like poverty issues or economic imbalances, right?
Yeah.
So that's also driving gender-based violences. So definitely when we think about climate-related policies, we definitely need to integrate, take into consideration gender and how women and girls are being impacted. But also in many countries, when there is climate disasters, women and young women and girls are the first to be taken out of schools because there's poverty that exacerbates due to climate crisis, and many women and young women and girls have issues accessing education.
Yes.
And definitely there's also case studies that shows then how child marriage increases and so on. But it's also very...
Even in these times, is it?
Yes.
Oh my
Child
God.
marriage is still a reality even in these days. So because of climate induced poverty, there is spike in early child marriages, but also there's also spike in women and girls being taken out of school.
Yeah.
And also we need to see women and girls not only as like people that is vulnerable or to these effects, but also as agents of change,
Yes,
right?
yes.
They hold a lot of expertise, from the local level to a global level. They hold a lot of knowledge because they are impacted by the climate crisis.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that women and girls have access to education, but they also have access to decision-making spaces, and they're
Yes.
part of norm setting and policy setting. Even in COP, there's a big issue of gender parity, where most of the delegations are male.
Yes.
We don't have a lot
Enough
of
women.
Exactly, we don't have enough women in official delegations and women that are negotiators and in decision making spaces. And we're tired of just being beneficiaries of and
Yes.
just like dealing with the outcomes of the things, but we need to be there when the outcomes are being set.
Absolutely.
So we need to also look at women from the leadership role and not just as those who are just vulnerable to the climate crisis.
True. And I think women have this nurturing and, a loving approach towards solving problems. And also the empathy factor is more in the feminine, I must say, in the feminine energy. So I truly believe if they are in a leadership role, they can make much more sensible decisions, which is better for the well-being of the society as a whole.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. How we integrate care, right?
exactly.
And we also see like something that I didn't talk about is care work. So it's women who mainly lead
Yes,
care work.
care work.
And when climate change happens, it's the women who do care work that acts as buffer systems
Yeah.
while they absorb after effects of the disaster. So how they care for different kinds of care work, right? So we need to also take that into factor.
Correct, yeah. And I've seen many, I don't want to judge any gender, but mostly it's women who integrate this small changes in their lifestyle to make it more eco-conscious or, live more consciously without harming the environment. But the thing is, they always feel that these small changes does not really change anything in the bigger picture. And when it comes to climate change, it's not really going to affect these small things which they are doing at an individual level. But I truly believe that these small, imperfectly sustainable actions definitely lead up to a bigger effect, towards climate action. I would love to know your thoughts on these. Do these individual actions really matter? And does the consumer's purchasing power influence policy changes and policy decisions at that level?
So, often at times we also feel very overwhelmed because the crisis is so big that as individuals we can't make a difference.
Yeah.
But we need to think that, as individuals, when we come together, it's millions of us.
Absolutely.
And definitely one of the biggest power we hold is power as consumers. So yeah, goods we purchase and the way we use commodities definitely makes a difference because it affects trends and it affects patterns of productions. The Earth overshoot.
Yes.
So
that's
Earth
sad.
overshoot is basically when we use the resources of the earth more than it can replenish. I always get asked this question, can individual make a difference? Yes, but it also depends which individual you are, right? Are you a rich individual, that is in the top 1%? Then yes,
yes,
you have to
definitely.
make a difference. Are we talking about Elon Musk? Then yes, Jeff Bezos. So
Yes.
the top 1%, we should target those
Yes.
individuals as well, even though they're just individuals.
Exactly. Exactly.
And then definitely we know that 100 companies are responsible for 70% of the emissions. So it is also like how we hold those 100 companies into account, and that also comes back to us as individuals, right? Like what role are we playing in holding those 100 countries into account? And we have seen in the past, like with different kinds of movements, whether it is the civil rights movement, the decolonial movement, the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, the feminist movements and waves, all of these movements has made a difference. So we as the climate movement, we're not starting from scratch.
Yes.
We are holding onto the movement that has come before us, and we are holding onto the strength from this movement to make a new wave of difference. So we've seen in history that us mobilizing together can make change.
Yeah.
So why can't it be true this time?
Absolutely. And having said that, can you suggest some small actions other than lifestyle changes which our listeners can adopt or do to support the systemic change you and other young activists are advocating for?
So the first thing I would say is to organize. So when I started as, when I was like starting into climate activism, I initially felt very, very lonely.
Yeah.
I was like so frustrated. Why is nobody taking a change?
Yeah.
Why is no one else as worried as me? But honestly, I had all of these thoughts in the mind, and I didn't realize other people had the same thoughts.
Yeah.
And it took a lot of courage for me to get out of my comfort zone and be like, hey, does anyone want to join me to take
Okay,
climate action together? And that maybe that bravery was first in my school, in my classroom, asking my classmates to do something about it. And then it turned into a bigger global movement like Fridays for Future, asking thousands of people across the world to do something about it. So it can go from something small to big, right? So I would say it's very important to organize, and you can organize within your community. So let's say within your building, right? Come together and ask for a composting bin or a recycling bin, something as small as that. Or we can come together in different cities to think about how can we make more green infrastructure, how can we make more green spaces within our cities or communities and things like that, like parks. So let's talk about how to make our public infrastructure more heat resilient and things like that. So all of this can happen if communities come together.
Okay.
You can, contact your municipality. You can come together. You can even make differences within your own buildings or societies and things like that. So I would say the first step and the difficult step to take is come together and organize and find your community. You could even start a book club in your society where you come together and read different like eco-related books, and that is like enhancing your knowledge. And maybe you can say, how can I take this knowledge back to the sector that I work in, maybe back to my offices and make a difference. So maybe that's something that like a very easy thing that you can do is come together and create a community, whether that's to do book clubs or read poetry or story tell, and even to create climate cafes. So climate cafes is more of an informal get together where you come together to talk about climate, and you can say, how are you feeling? Right? Like, what are the emotions that you're facing as you read about climate crisis? I think that's also important. Mental health. We don't talk enough about mental health, and there's a direct linkage about how climate crisis worsens mental health, especially when due to, like, for example, what we don't talk about is when we have these heat waves, a lot of people are stuck to sitting indoors, and so when they spend lots of time indoors and not having access to outdoor spaces and outdoor socializing, it definitely negatively impacts their mental health as well. So when we talk about even like simple things that we experience day to day, like heat waves, we need to link that to how are you feeling emotionally and mental health wise.
True. Coming to mental health, I was going to ask you that climate activism is very overwhelming. And how are you taking care of your mental health? And if there are teens or young adults who are interested to go this path, how can the adults in their family, parents, mentors support them in their overall well-being when they are on this path? Because it is overwhelming, and as you said, it does stir up many emotions. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So it's a couple of things, right? So first it was for me to realize that it's not a sprint but a marathon.
Yeah.
That, change is not going to
It takes
happen
time.
overnight. It's going to take
Yes.
time. It's like planting a seed, right? You sow the seed, but you need to take time to, water it, give it
Yeah.
enough sunlight for it to slowly bear fruits.
Yes.
And so in the beginning, I was so addicted to like, no, I need to see something like happen right now.
Yeah,
Whereas I
yeah.
would get very frustrated and I would spend days and days and days working on things which led to burnout. And we often don't talk about burnout in the climate community.
Yeah.
And we really need to be more honest about how we're using our energy and
Yes.
our capacities. So it was for me to like take time with it. And then second thing is that it is by this author called Adrienne Mary Brown, who is incredible. And there's something that she said that always stands out to me, which is rest is resilience. So
Yeah.
in a capitalistic community that values productivity over anything and wants us to build individualistic power, when we
Yes.
come together and rest as a collective, then we are resisting many systems of oppression and systems that is worsening the climate crisis.
Yeah.
So I started to see rest as an active practice rather than rest that should come as an after effect of a burnout.
Nice.
So that's something that I started to work on. And lastly, it's that it takes a village. You can't do
Yes.
things alone. So there is always power in unity. There's power in collective. So I started building my friendships and my community and making sure that I don't show up alone, but I show up
Yeah.
with, people
Yeah.
behind me and people alongside me. So I think that made the biggest difference ever.
Yeah.
And sometimes the people besides me are my parents, are my mentors,
Yes.
right? And friends that I've made like the best of friendships with the climate movement. And now we're all in different parts of the world because we only get to see during COPs
COPs
or
and-
some conferences. But honestly, like we are connected
Yeah.
to show that there is that power in that connection.
True.
And also, I realized that maybe people are focused in different fights. Like, for example, someone might be focused in the fight for gender equality, or maybe someone's focused in the fight, like in different countries over like racism and different classism and different issues. And I realized that maybe they don't have to be in climate change, but we're all connected.
Yes.
Because all of these fights at the end of the day are collected, and what we need to be looking towards is our collective liberation from all of these different systems.
Correct.
So looking at it that way made me feel like I'm not alone at all, because some of these bigger movements exist, and that's
Yes.
like millions of people across the world. So if we do come together, we will make a difference.
That was powerful. Rest is resilience. Yes. And to end a fun question, what does Ayeshka do for fun when she's not a climate activist?
I'll always find a way to tie it to climate, but my favorite hobby is going to art galleries. I'm a
Oh.
big art enthusiast.
Really?
When I was young, I used to paint a lot, and I used to be part of my art club back in school as well.
Nice.
So often at times when I'm very overwhelmed by emotions and burnt out, I love to go to art galleries and stare at artwork
Wow.
by that's made by different incredible artists out there. And I feel like art says stories that we can't tell with
Yes.
words. And I'm also unintentionally calling all of the artists to the climate movement, because
Yes.
we need you to tell stories that we are unable to tell with the work that we are doing.
Yes, absolutely. It was so powerful, Ayeshka, and I'm so inspired that right from a young age of 14, I was thinking it's 15, but you were even more young. So it's very inspiring how if you will to do something, I think we can achieve it. And you shared such wonderful insights which are quite actionable. We all can take action and move towards, creating a more safe environment for all of us. And as you said, climate change is happening right now. It's not for a distant future. We are already experiencing it. Just that we shouldn't wait till it happens to us,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That was powerful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, something that I want to leave us with is
Yes.
to really think what seeds do you want to sow? Because the seeds that you sow right now will be the ones that will be reaped by the future generations.
Yes.
So do you want to sow the seeds of climate resilience, of, gender equality, of equal education? Like what are the things that you want to sow now? And I feel like that's what's going to make a difference in the future. So you do have a power, right? And
Yes.
you definitely have a role to play, even as an individual and even as a community. So don't feel belittled by the bigger crises, because there is definitely power in number when we collectively organize.
Yes, we are 8 billion of us on the planet.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you, and thank you for sharing all the work you do, and thank you for the work you do, and thank you for sharing all those insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was truly an honor.
Thank you. Cool. We did it. It was continuous. That's nice.
High five.
I didn't have to see my questions.
Oh, that's amazing. I think we just got in the moment.
In the moment.
I hope I said okay things.
No, it was amazing.